We're turning this morning to a powerful poem by the great Israeli poet, the late Haim Gouri, who read one of his poems yesterday, spoke a little bit about his life. The poem is on page 3. It's called "Almost All the Sacred Cows Have Been Slaughtered." כמעט כל הפרות הקדושות נשחטו. מה נעשה? אולי נפנה אל גדול העצה ורב העליליה, האומר ועושה. אולי נבריח כמה מהן ממזרח, מהאור שמעבר לגבול. אולי נבקש פסק זמן. אולי תומרקין יקים בידיו הקשות אנדרטה לזכרן היקר. ברזל מעוגל מזדקר על רכס קשוב מול מואב. קשה לי אישית ללא הפרות האלה. שנים על שנים ראיתי אותן. אני הולך ונעשה דומה למתושלח, לעוד פרה קדושה שנשחטה.
Almost all the sacred cows have been slaughtered. What shall we do? Perhaps we should turn to the one who is wondrous in purpose and mighty in deed, to the one who says and does. Perhaps we'll smuggle some from the east, from the Jordan Valley beyond the border. Perhaps we'll ask for a time out. Perhaps Tumarkin will erect with his rough hands a monument to their precious memory. Curved iron, rising on an attentive ridge facing Moab. It's difficult for me personally without those cows. For years and years I've pastured them. I'm coming to resemble Methuselah, another sacred cow that has been slaughtered.
Haim Gouri, who was born in 1923, died in 2018, spans
At 94.
At 94, the history of Israel from pre-state years. He fought in the Palmach, and he served in the army until the Yom Kippur War. And he spans even into the 21st century, all the ups and downs of the history and the story of the modern state of Israel. A lot of sacred cows in his life. A lot of things that provided a sense of familiarity and safety and certainty. And as he comes to the end of his life, this poem is part of a collection of 86 poems that he wrote at the age of 86. When he was willing to revise his thinking, when he was willing, as he says here, to slaughter some of the sacred cows that had been pillars for him and for so many Israelis in terms of the certainties and the things that were taken for granted. He was incredibly frank about his changing opinions and his willingness to admit his mistakes and the mistakes of his generation.
Throughout the course of his life, I think his poetry reflects that, and it culminates in this magnum opus, really, at his called Eval. And we see his changing identity over the time through his poems in many ways. A poem earlier in his life, there's a famous line called "I Am a Civil War," where he talks about kind of the tumult in him, about his feelings about what it means to have also established the state of Israel, but also have reservations on what has become of the state. And he signed a manifesto in 1975 supporting the movement for a greater Israel, which advocated for incorporating the West Bank into the state of Israel. And then he retracted his signing onto that manifesto with deep regret after seeing also the moral price on Israel for that statement. So he
said it was one of the greatest regrets of his life.
That the sense is that not only did he change his mind, but he changed his mind as one of the most well-known poets in Israel in a public way, which is courageous in many ways, that his poetry, we think of Yehuda Amichai in many ways, I think, as the greatest poet in our time of Israel, but in many ways, I think for Israeli society, Haim Gouri represents more of that than even Amichai.
And what is, I think, one of the most remarkable things about his life and his poetry is that rather than pointing the finger to the others, to the settlers, to the extremists, he turned the light of moral scrutiny upon himself and his generation. And he did a lot of self-reckoning and a lot of remorse. And that's really quite unique. And there's a lot for us to learn, particularly at this time of Teshuvah. And the question is, are we willing to see the sacred cows, and are we willing to be accountable? Are we willing to slaughter those that need to be slaughtered, and to acknowledge that sometimes the path forward is one that requires the slaughtering of sacred cows.
He also points to that Metushelach is the person to have lived the longest in the Torah, and so 900 and some odd years, right? And so you hear in the poem the sense of longevity he has, right? He's comparing himself to Metushelach, who and also his sorrow at the slaughtered cows, the holy. It's hard to let them go. He acknowledges that he passed. It's a very powerful image that you pasture your sacred cows, that we work really hard to keep them near us. We pasture them, we feed them, and he understands. He says it's personally very difficult to let them go, even as they also need to be slaughtered. So that it's not that he's at home in a sense with the cows being slaughtered. He's troubled because it very much made up his identity as a person, and yet he recognizes that he can't count on them. And the poem acknowledges also at the beginning of the poem, when he says how many sacred cows have been slaughtered, he says, well, who do we turn to now? And his answer is,
we turn to God.
We turn to God, which means also that the sacred cows function as a replacement for God. He's not turning to God with the sacred cows. He turns to God only when he loses the sacred cows, which in some way speaks to the fact that sacred cows are often idolatrous. That there's a sense that they take up space in ways that take the place of God.
And that God is the source of truth. When you slaughter
Yes.
the sacred cows, then you turn to God in search for real truth.
Yes.
So here we are after a year after October 7th. It's October 4th today. A year after October 7th, a lot of sacred cows have been slaughtered. Here in our own community here in America, we have experienced a great divisiveness and great turmoil with different sectors of the Jewish community that have positioned themselves differently with respect to October 7th and its aftermath. It has created a great rift within our community, a Jewish community in America, and it has created a great rift within families, including families in our community, in our congregation, here at BJ. There are people who have not been able to talk to each other, people who have fought with each other, people who have turned their backs to each other, who've not been able to have holidays together. Not Thanksgiving last November, not Pesach, in an atmosphere of dialogue and conversation and love, and it's been really hard.
Even we got a call and emails from Israeli Channel 12 in Israel looking for families experiencing intergenerationally these kinds of challenges, because it's actually a story in Israel about America that there's so much challenge between conversations between generations. So it's not just like an inner community story, even in Israel, they're understanding the impact on what that means for life here for the Jewish community.
And so this, perhaps the sacred cow has been the sacred cow of Jewish unity and uniformity. We all think together the same in the Jewish community. We are a monolithic community. And we're all oriented in the same way vis-a-vis Israel. We all support and love and embrace Israel in the same way. And that sacred cow has painfully now been slaughtered. And there's been a number of issues that have been put forth in the last year since October 7th and the aftermath and the war of Gaza that have made us profoundly uncomfortable, that have triggered us, many of us, and that have actually been the source of the conflict, mostly intergenerational conflict and also intra-community conflict within the Jewish community here in America.
I also want to say that it's not that those disagreements haven't been true for a very long time. I think there have always been many disagreements amongst the Jewish people in terms of stance for Israel. In some way, I think the public nature of this past year and I think the growing younger generation, which is more vocal on campus, things like that, have put the issue much more in the public eye than we've been able, to not as expose our dirty laundry in that way. And that's been a concern of the Jewish community, of course, here in America too, is to keep things inside so we don't expose weaknesses to the outside world. And so I think that's also a sacred cow that has been slaughtered, is that we can kind of just keep it on the inside because, of course, what happened on the terrible brutality of October 7th and the war's aftermath has played out not only in a very particular Jewish peoplehood state of Israel way, but in a very national and international way, in ways that those lines are not easily kept. We can't keep just to ourselves because it's really an international issue in ways that it's never been before.
So the first thing that, among many things, one of the things that was questioned publicly was the issue of Israel's moral purity, which many of us have maintained for decades and decades. There's no more moral army than the Israeli army, and that has been questioned. There was a presentation of a claim against Israel and Israeli leaders at the International Criminal Court of genocide, which has rattled us and triggered us in ways we have not known ever before. And just to remember that the term genocide was coined by a Jew who was from Poland, Raphael Lemkin, who coined this term genocide in the 40s as applying to the extermination of the Jewish people. And now that accusation is turned on Israel and by extension on the Jewish people. We have maintained Israel is the most moral army, has a code of ethics, a right, of course, to defend itself. I think very few people, if any, question the right of Israel to defend itself. But the instinct has been to dismiss this accusation outright. And
I think part of the dismissal is we don't want to look in the mirror. It's like it's triggered such a deep sense of it couldn't be that because of our history and because of that word, it's just unfathomable that what was ours could then be turned on us. And so the instinct is to say, with an accusation like that, is we can't even entertain anything about, the question about the moral purity and the moral failure. And the question is, is a healthy society, is it willing to look in the mirror and wrestle with the truth? Can we, what's triggered so profoundly in us about this question, do we have that kind of moral purity? Are we willing to look at it? Are we willing to ask questions? Are we willing to consider that we're not as impenetrable as we perceived us to be.
We have acknowledged here in our community, it has made some of us uncomfortable, the suffering of innocent people in Gaza, including many children, the lack of medical care, the humanitarian disaster that the war provoked. And it's been made a lot of people uncomfortable to acknowledge the suffering of innocent people. And so the question is, are we willing to look in the mirror? Are we willing to ask questions about the possibility, even if not getting to genocide, but the possibility that excesses were incurred in? And
the question is, I think part of it is like, what are we giving up by acknowledging that kind of sorrow and trauma? Like, often it seems that if we can acknowledge the devastation of another community, of the Palestinians in Gaza, of what's happening also in the West Bank to Palestinians, which is just terrible, and now even, of course, in Lebanon, what's happening, that for some that feels like a betrayal. It feels like a betrayal to say another people is suffering too. I know we suffered. We have suffered. We October 7th, I mean, unimaginable horrors. And yet, what are we giving up by saying they're suffering too? And often there's an accusation, and it's certainly been leveled at us too, that it's a betrayal of the Jewish people to acknowledge another people's suffering. And I really wonder what is that deep place of where does it come from? What is that about?
what are we trying to protect?
What are we trying to protect?
So another issue that has been difficult this year for our community, I don't mean just here, but the community at large, and we said before, the intergenerational conflict, is the centrality of Israel in Jewish life and the question of loyalty to Israel. There are many Jews in America who have condemned Israel's position in Gaza and have separated themselves from any allegiance to the state of Israel. I don't want to have anything to do with this and with the Jewish community. And many young Jews, particularly in the younger generation, on campus and elsewhere, have taken themselves out from anything to do with Israel and with the Jewish community.
Because in many ways, I mean, I would say sometimes we lump all these people in one boat, which is, I think, an unfair to make a large generalization about where people are at. You actually don't know where someone is at until you ask them specifically, and there's so much to be said on these questions. But I think many people, Jews, who are separating themselves from Jewish community, many are making the claim that it's their Jewish values that are forcing the separation, their values of justice, their values of commitment to the stranger and taking care, all the things that they say, and we've heard this too, of course. I grew up in this community and you taught me these things. How can you not hold them up? Why are so many excuses being made? And so it's forced people to say, I don't want that. I don't belong here, and take themselves out. Now there are the large range. There are some people who are doing it from a place of Jewish values, and other people who are stepping outside of the community writ large. But it's caused a really big question, I think,
there are people who were incapable, Jews who were incapable on October 7th.
Yes.
Not October 8th or 9th or 10th, October 7th, incapable of joining Jewish grief for the murder of over 1,200 people, the brutality, the horror, the kidnapping of 240 hostages. There were many Jews who were completely incapable of expressing any solidarity with their family, with their extended family, with the Jewish people, which I consider to be something extremely painful and shameful.
Yeah.
And the many people have separated themselves this way. Now, many other people have acknowledged that grief and that pain and have separated themselves later on when the war started. Now, on the other hand,
I just want to say about the people who, I found that there are many people who, one, have felt that a great pain and solidarity with our community and with the pain of what happened October 7th and all that has followed, and yet they're not willing to give a blanket pass to Israel to say it could do whatever it wants. And those are young people that feel like they don't have a home, right? That on college campuses, you have to choose one side or another. Everything is about, in the ways that we often can't acknowledge the binaries. So there's no home, talking about exile, we spoke about exile yesterday, there's often not a home for people who are living with both. We have a community built on that. But out in college, that's not as much the same.
Yes, and the mainstream Jewish community has made itself impermeable to any conversation.
Correct.
Anything that questions anything is forbidden.
It's forbidden.
And so you have on the one side people who are questioning and who can't find a home, and on the other hand, the people who basically inhabit the home, sort of the main line of the mainstream Jewish community, who close the doors to any type of conversation or thinking or questioning or wrestling or confronting some of these issues together.
So the sacred cow, I think, around that we could kind of live in the story that we have been living for decades, which is a sense of allegiance to the point of lacking a critique, or the critique being beyond the pale, is not sustainable anymore if we want to have a younger generation. Because there's a sense, and so the question is, how do we build a Jewish community that's robust and strong and has inclusive, and has a Zionism that people can relate to, that is relevant for 2024 in ways that were not true, for people who grew up post-67. Most of our young people, the only Israel that they have known is an Israel that is in major crisis at war with the occupation. And so the question is really, if the sacred cow of holding on to Israel in this way that in some way has become an American religion, this nationalism towards Israel, how can we build a Jewish life in America that is willing to sustain really powerful, important questions, to be committed to an Israel that is based on Jewish values in relationship, but also can tolerate the questioning and the conversation and the critique.
And as Israel turns more and more nationalistic and more right-wing, a lot of young people can't live with this.
Yeah.
We say Israel is a value, but young people can't live with the value of a country that is more and more nationalistic, more and more right-wing, more and more supremacist, more and more extremist and fanatical, and that maintains an occupation of another people. People can't live with this. Many can't live with this.
Right. I would just say it's hard for us to live with it too.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So we're struggling, I think, but we're not willing to run away. I think that's part of the commitment, is our investment as rabbis, as a Jewish community. And by the way, of course, that struggle is not unreal in Israel. There are people on the ground in Israel who are fighting for that future that is more just and to end the occupation. And so we have partners, but many people in America don't know who those partners are. So part of our obligation is to raise those things up. The third sacred cow is not about American society in particular, but something actually that's happened in Israel since October 7th, which is the sacred cow that has been slaughtered is Israel's supreme power supreme value to rescue its own citizens from its enemies. I didn't grow up, I was not born yet with the Entebbe. But
you were born,
I was born, but I wasn't.
I was almost 20.
So I don't remember it, but the story of that.
I remember it, and many of us remember it as a glorious day when Israel went all the way to Uganda to rescue citizens and non-citizens who had been kidnapped by terrorists And I mean, the irony here is that the Prime Minister's own brother, Yoni Netanyahu, valiantly fell in the attempt, in the rescue of the hostages at the airport in Entebbe. And we hold that as such a great value that Israel will do anything, anywhere, to rescue citizens who have been taken hostage by Israel's enemies.
That they would never abandon.
They would never be abandoned.
And there's been a kind of running statement that we've seen in different places that people say, if we don't bring back the hostages, Israel will cease to exist. And John Polin, the father of Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Alav Shalom, wrote actually, he grew up in Chicago, John, and in a conservative community. He went to Ramah, Wisconsin, and they made Aliyah, and they identify in the National Religious Zionist camp. He wears a kippah sruga. And he wrote an op-ed in Makor Rishon, which is a religious Zionist paper in Israel, which was on day 308. It was published on Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av, so before, of course, Hirsch was murdered. And this is part of what it said. He says, for varying reasons, the hostages have become a matter of right and left, as if they are a part of a package you get when you choose a political identity. But the value of life, arvut hadidit, mutual responsibility, ransom of captives, or in the lexicon of today, the chatufim, the kidnapped, are not a political issue, and they never were. They are not about the division into right and left. The hostages are part of us. They are real people, men and women, young and old, with faces and families, part of this great thing called the nation and state of Israel. I am Hirsch's father, he wrote. We are already 308 days into this nightmare. I am calling for a deal because I personally feel that beyond my desire as a father to save my son and bring him home, the price of not returning them will be an unbearable blow to our national identity and will tear Israeli society apart from the inside. This framing as if the return of the hostages is somehow in opposition to victory in the war is wrong. There really is no victory without the return of the hostages.
So here we have a number of things that stare us right in the face as Jews, as lovers of Israel, as members of the large national and international Jewish community, things that are looking at us in the face and make us profoundly uncomfortable. Sacred cows that have been now slaughtered, as you said, in public, in the papers, on national television. Things that are profoundly destabilizing, like Haim Gouri says in his poem. It's profoundly destabilizing, profoundly painful to slaughter these sacred cows. So where do we turn? We turn to God and search for truth. Because we know that a people, a nation, a community has to be based on foundations of truth. It cannot be based on foundations of things we think are the truth or the lies that we tell ourselves.
Were the truth.
Or wish were the truth. And so to have the courage to face these questions and to open our eyes, to renounce self-congratulation, to have a little bit of humility, to have the opportunity for some remorse, to become aware of the chances that we've missed. And as Haim Gouri says, actually not in the poem, but he said at the end of his life, to inhabit our regrets with courage. And where do we go from here?
Well, I think what is so profound, I think. First of all, sometimes we slaughter the sacred cows, sometimes they're slaughtered for us. We don't actually have a choice in the matter. But in a sense, when we slaughter the sacred cows or they've been slaughtered, we are in exile. As he says, it's very hard to live without them in this place. But the beginning of coming home is actually telling the truth and searching for it. We don't have all the answers. I mean, part of what having sacred cows slaughtered does is it raises questions. It opens the Pandora's box in some way. What sacred cows do is they keep things in wrap, under wrap.
My hope is that we can come back together as a community, as a large Jewish community, that we can come back intergenerationally at having these conversations, at keeping ourselves united, not because we think the same way, but because we're willing to raise the question and debate them and discuss them and live sometimes with a disagreement, but in the
Isn't
conversation.
that what Jewish life was built on?
Exactly.
I mean, the sense of machloket, l'shem shamayim, the sense that disagreement for the sake of heaven was the home of our people for so long, and that's what we want to build today, is a robust Jewish life that is not afraid to tolerate the questions, but willing to be in hard, deep, profound conversations and courageously move forward in this new paradigm to build not another sacred cow, but a community that is turning towards God in truth.
Amen.